My name is Murray Sloane. I am 57 years old, and I have never once been called well-dressed. Last November, at my son's dinner party in Oakville, his wife leaned toward him in the kitchen doorway and said, voice low but not low enough, "Can he not clean up before he comes to these things? He makes us look bad." 28 years of crawling through crawl spaces and mechanical rooms. 28 years of the same navy work jacket, with Sloane plumbing stitched across the back in white thread. I wore it to my son's convocation. I wore it to his mother's funeral. I wore it that night because I had come straight from a job in Burlington, and it was the only good thing I owned. My son heard her say it. My son said, "I know, I'll deal with it." I finished my coffee. I drove home. The next morning I made 3 phone calls. None of them took more than 20 minutes. None of them were angry. Every single one of them was legal. By the following Thursday, my son's wife couldn't understand why the bank had stopped returning her calls. But before I get to that, let me take you back to the phone call that started all of this. And to an envelope sitting on my kitchen counter that I should have opened 3 weeks earlier. My son called on a Wednesday. I knew he wanted something because he talked about the Leafs for 4 solid minutes before getting to it. He's always done that. Hockey when he's nervous. His mother was the same way with weather. "There's a dinner," he said. "Nothing formal. Just some people connected to Vanessa's work." "What time?" 7. A pause. I heard him breathing. "And Dad, maybe wear something, something a little nicer." I said I would. He said thanks like a man setting down a heavy box. After I hung up, I stood in front of my closet for a while. I don't own much. 4 flannels, 2 union shirts, both faded enough that the logos are more suggestion than fact. A pair of dress pants I bought for my wife's funeral 12 years ago that I haven't been able to button since. And the jacket. Navy canvas, bought new in 1996. Sloane plumbing across the back. My name, Murray. Stitched smaller over the left breast. Burn mark on the right sleeve from a torch I got too close to during a rough-in in Brantford. The lining repaired twice by my own hand. I ran it through the wash. I ironed it, which you're not supposed to do with canvas, but I did it anyway. It hung on the doorknob, and it looked good to me. It looked like a man who had spent 28 years building something worth building. I didn't know it wasn't enough. Nobody had ever told me it wasn't enough. Before I left, I noticed an envelope on the counter. Cream-colored, my son's return address in the corner. A bank logo beneath it. I'd been meaning to ask him about it for 3 weeks. I set it back down. Some other time, I thought. I left that envelope on the kitchen counter. If I'd carried it out the door that night, everything might have ended differently. Probably worse. My son and his wife live in Oakville, in a house with a long stone driveway and a kitchen that cost more than I made in my first 3 years in the trades. I drove up from Hamilton in my 2011 Ram, creek mud on the wheel wells from a service call that morning in Stony Creek. I parked on the street, not because I was ashamed of the truck, I'm not, but because I didn't want it standing next to their cars making a point I didn't intend to make. My son's wife answered the door. She looked at the jacket first, then at my face, and her smile arrived about a half-second late. "Murray, you made it." She didn't hug me. She took the 6-pack of Molson I'd brought and set it somewhere behind the kitchen island. I watched it sitting back there by the recycling all night. There were 8 people in the living room. I was the only one who had ever been on a job site at -20. The most important person in the room was a man named Holbrook, 62, silver hair and the kind of tan you get for February with a golf course attached to it. He owned a mid-sized property development company out of Mississauga. I'll come back to him. He matters more than anyone in this story except my son. My son's wife had been in residential staging and interior consulting for 6 years. She was good at it. I want to say that plainly because it's true, and because being fair to her has cost me something throughout all of this. That night, Holbrook was the reason everyone was there. A contract on 3 of his new builds. The kind of account that could double your client list in 12 months. I stood by the bookcase and did what I've done on every job site I've ever worked. I listened. Around 8 o'clock, my son pulled me into the hallway. He glanced back over his shoulder first. He's done that since he was a kid. "Dad, the line of credit. The bank's been trying to reach you about the renewal." "I know. They called the house." "Just sign off on it, please. Things are tight right now, and Vanessa's close to landing this Holbrook deal, and I just need you to." He rubbed both hands over his face. "Please." I looked at my son, 31 years old, good shoulders, his mother's eyes. Does Vanessa know what I signed in 2019? I asked. He looked at the floor. The dishwasher ran in the next room. Someone laughed at something Holbrook said. I never really got into all the details with her, he said, quiet, like a man admitting the leak he'd been ignoring. 3 years, he hadn't told her. I thought about something that happens in old copper when a joint begins to fail. Everything still works. Water comes out the tap, the pressure feels right, and all the while there's a slow failure inside the wall that nobody can see until the ceiling starts to go. Okay, I said. He looked up, hopeful, and it broke something in me that he looked hopeful. So you'll sign? Go back in, son, they'll miss you. He put his hand on my shoulder on the way past. Quick, like he was checking whether something was still running. I stood in that hallway a long time. He never got around to telling her. That sentence, I already knew, was going to cost them something. I just didn't know the number yet. I went to find the bathroom, and came back down the hall to find my jacket gone from the hook by the door. I didn't say anything. A man who makes a scene about a missing jacket at someone else's dinner party doesn't get invited back. And I still wanted to be invited back. That's the part I still think about. I checked the closet. I checked the bench. I went out through the kitchen side door into the garage. There it was, my jacket folded across the lid of the dryer, face down so you couldn't read the name, next to a cardboard box with Goodwill written in black marker on the side. I stood in the cold, with the furnace ticking behind me, and I looked at that box for a long time. I plumbed that house. 3 weekends in the spring of 2021. Roughed in the new ensuite, relocated the laundry stack, caught a cross connection in the main line that would have flagged on any municipal inspection and held up their closing by 6 weeks minimum. I wouldn't take $1. My son offered twice. I told him not to insult me. I was wearing that jacket the whole time. I picked it up. I turned it face up, Murray, white thread going the color of old paper. Back in the hallway, a blazer had been laid over the arm of the chair near the front door. Charcoal gray, tag still on. I checked the size, 42 regular. I'm a 46. There you are. My son's wife appeared behind me, bright as a work light. I just thought you might be more comfortable in that. It belonged to a friend of Holbrook's who left it last time. I thought, go on, try it. I looked at the jacket. Then I said the thing I'd been trying to find words for all night. It's a fine jacket, I said. It just isn't mine. She smiled. The kind of smile that means the conversation is already over. Try it on, go on. So I did. I put on her jacket. I stood in that living room for the next hour and a half with it hanging open across my chest, because I couldn't close it across my back, and not one person in that room said a word about it. Not one. Then Holbrook found me near the window. He didn't ask me what I did. He asked my son's wife, who was standing beside me, wine glass raised, comfortable as a Sunday morning. And who's this gentleman? She didn't blink. Oh, that's Murray. He did some work on the house. 4 seconds. 4 seconds to take a man out of his own family. The room nodded. Someone said something about how hard it was to find reliable contractors these days. Holbrook started to turn away. Then he stopped. He frowned. He tilted his head the way men do when a word snags on something old. Sloane, he said. As in Sloane Plumbing out of Hamilton? The room went quiet in the particular way. Rooms go quiet when money is paying attention. That's my shop, I said. Holbrook looked at me then, really looked, at the jacket that didn't fit, at my hands. And he said one word, and it wasn't a question. Huh. He turned back to his wine. My son's wife started talking very quickly about the renovation timeline, and did not stop for 3 full minutes. I didn't understand what had just happened. I'd understand it later. I was 12 years wrong about that man, and it had cost me things I'll be working out for the rest of my life. Around 10 o'clock, I went to get a glass of water. The kitchen door was half open. My son and his wife stood at the island with their backs to me. I'm not certain she knew I was there. I've decided it doesn't matter. Can he not clean up before he comes to these things? Her voice was low, but rooms carry. He makes us look bad. My son, who I put through 2 years at Mohawk and would have done 4 if he'd asked. My son, whose first 7 months of rent I covered when Toronto didn't work out the way he'd hoped. My son, who I drove down the 401 to help move into his first apartment, then drove back to Hamilton alone the same night, Because I had a 6 o'clock start on a commercial job in Binbrook. My son said, I know, I'll deal with it. Deal with it. I stood in that doorway for 3 seconds, and here is what I want you to hear, because it surprised me too. I wasn't angry, I got clear. It's the same thing that happens when you open a shut-off valve that hasn't moved in 15 years and everything stops making noise all at once and you can see exactly where the water needs to go. No guessing, no feeling, just the pipe and the direction it has to run. I walked in, they turned around. Her face went white and his went the color of old drywall, and neither of them said a single word. I set my glass on the counter. I took off the borrowed jacket, I folded it, I set it on the island between them, tag still on. I went out through the side door. I picked up my jacket off the dryer. I put it on and buttoned every button. I walked to my truck and nobody followed me. They thought deal with it meant I agreed to be handled. 28 years in the trades teaches you exactly one thing above everything else. You don't argue with a live wire. You cut the power and you make the repair. I got home at 11:30. I didn't slam anything. I want to be honest about that, because people expect a story like this to have a broken plate in it somewhere. I made coffee, at midnight. It's what I do before an early call-out, and something in me had already decided I was on one. I sat at the kitchen table. The envelope was right where I'd left it. I opened it. Bank of Montreal business loan, personal guarantee. Executed April 2019, principal $280,000. Sloane Renovations Inc. Guarantor. Murray James Sloane, collateral, the house I was sitting in. Free and clear since 2014. My son needed a cargo van, 2 sets of tools, liability coverage, and 18 months of operating runway to get his renovation company off the ground. 2-year-old company, no history, no assets. The bank said no to him. Then the bank looked at me. 28 years, not one late payment, not one NSF. A house in Hamilton with no mortgage. They didn't lend to my son, they lent to my signature. He'd always known that. She never asked. Underneath the loan documents was a 1-page renewal notice dated September 15th. I read one paragraph 4 times before I actually saw it. A guarantor may elect to withdraw from the personal guarantee upon the scheduled renewal of the credit facility, provided written notice is submitted no fewer than 30 days prior to the renewal date. Renewal date, December 1st. Notice deadline, November 1st. 11 days. I put it back in the envelope. I squared the edges against the table. I went to bed. And here's the part I've never said out loud to anyone. I slept 8 hours straight. First time in over a year I didn't wake up at 2 in the morning doing somebody else's arithmetic in the dark. In the morning I made a list on the back of a work order. 3 items. Monday 8:15. I called the bank. My contact there had been in commercial lending for 20 years and still called me Mr. Sloane when other people were within earshot, and Murray when they weren't. I've been trying to reach you about the renewal, she said. I'm calling about it now. Walk me through the guarantor release process like I'm a new customer. She did. She was careful and thorough and honest, which is all you can ask. If I withdrew the guarantee, the bank would re-underwrite the credit facility. Sloane Renovations had 3 years of operating history and thin margins. Without a guarantor with real collateral standing behind it, the risk profile would change significantly. What about the operating line? I asked. A pause. The operating line is secured under the same instrument, Murray. If the guarantee releases, the line freezes. Same day, automatically. I did the math I already knew. That line was what my son ran payroll off of. 7 employees, material deposits, every job he had scheduled through the new year. Is all of this legal? Murray, her chair creaked. It's not just legal. It's your right. You've had it since the day you signed, and I told him so to his face. I asked her to send me the release form. I asked her to bill me personally for any outstanding interest on the equipment note so the company wouldn't take a penalty. She told me that was $4,200. I told her to do it. Before I hung up, she said something I've thought about nearly every day since. You should have done this a year ago. 2 calls left. Before I take you any further, if you've come this far with me, take a second to like and subscribe. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from and what time is it there? I read every single one, and if you've ever been managed out of a room you belonged in, I want to hear about it. Now let me keep going. My insurance broker's name is Gus. He's been my man since 2002. He answers his own phone, keeps a paper appointment book, and still sends Christmas cards by hand. Sloane Plumbing. Who burned something down? Nobody yet, Gus. I need you to remove my son's company from the commercial policy. Silence. Here's the thing I'd never told my son's wife. When my son opened Sloane Renovations, he looked into commercial general liability insurance. A 2-year-old renovation company in Ontario, with no claims history, gets quoted like a teenager buying a sports car. He was looking at $9,000 to $12,000 a year, minimum. I had 28 years of clean claims on my plumbing policy. Not one incident, not one subrogation, not one written complaint. My premium made brokers want to shake my hand. So Gus folded my son's company under my umbrella. He paid around $3,000 a year. He should have been paying $10,000. I carried the difference for 3 years without saying a word, because saying it out loud turns a gift into a ledger, and I never wanted him to feel the weight of it. He knew. His wife did not. Murray. Gus's voice had gone careful. You understand, if I pull him, he writes his own policy. Underwriting is 6 to 8 weeks minimum in this market. I know what underwriting is, Gus. His certificate of insurance lapses the day I file. He can't execute any commercial contract without a valid COI on file. File it today. He did. That afternoon, in a compliance spreadsheet inside a developer's office in Mississauga, a green field turned red. The third call was the one I'd been putting off. I had known Holbrook by reputation and by work for a long time. Sloane Plumbing had done 3 jobs for his company in the early 2000s. Dundas Road. 2 others. Good work, fair pay, no disputes. On the second project, I'd caught a cross-connection in the mechanical room that would have flagged on the occupancy inspection and delayed his closing by 6 weeks minimum. I flagged it on my own time and fixed it on my own dime, because it was the right thing to do, and because I don't leave a building with a problem I know about. He tried to hire me on 2 more projects after that. I let every call go to voicemail. I was certain a man like that, in a suit like that, called tradespeople to complain about invoices or push on price. I'd been talked down to in too many offices to sit in another one voluntarily. I was wrong. I'd been wrong for 12 years, but I didn't know that yet when I dialed his number. I told him who I was. I told him which projects we'd done for him. I told him he was going to hear some things about my son's company in the coming weeks, and that I wanted him to know the business was run by a capable man who had made a mistake. Then I asked him, if my son called looking for a reference, to give him a fair one. Holbrook was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What did they do to you?" I watched a crow land on the fence at the end of my driveway. "They asked me to be something I wasn't," I said. "So I'm going back to being what I was before they needed me to be anything else." More silence. "He designed that townhouse project on Upper Wellington," I said. "The one on the mountain. Best residential design I've seen in this city in 20 years, and I've been in this city my whole life." Holbrook asked me then if I'd be willing to meet and talk about bidding the mechanical package on his Lakeshore Commons project. I said yes. 22 days passed, not one phone call. Day 5, my son texted me, "Dad, you left early Saturday. Everything okay?" I looked at it for a while. Then I typed, "Everything's fine, son." And I wasn't lying. That was the part that got me. For the first time in a long time, everything actually was. On day 9, my son's wife posted photos from the dinner. 11 photographs. The table, the wine, the flowers, the good light coming through the dining room windows. Caption, "So grateful for the people who show up for us." I went through all 11. I'm not in a single one. Not a shoulder, not a reflection, not a shadow. 11 photographs of a room I stood in for 3 hours. I saved the last one, not for evidence. I've got no use for evidence. I saved it because I knew a night was coming when I'd go soft. I'm his father. That night always comes, and I wanted something to look at when it did. November 8th, 4:45 in the afternoon. I was on a crawlspace job in Ancaster when my phone rang. My son's voice was in pieces. "Dad, the bank froze the line. Payroll is Friday. I have 7 people, Dad. Marisol just had her second. What did you do?" I sat down on an overturned pail. I signed a form. Same as you did in 2019. You can't just, that's not. It's in the renewal package, son. Paragraph 4. I could have done it 18 months ago. A long silence, an office phone ringing somewhere behind him, nobody picking it up. Then very small. Is this about the jacket? I closed my eyes. No, it was never about the jacket. Then what? The phrase, I said. Deal with it. You told your wife you'd deal with me, not talk to me, not stand next to me, deal with me, like a blocked drain, like a permit problem. Nothing on the line. Well, I said, you dealt with me. I'm dealt with. He made a sound I had heard exactly once before, standing in the rain at Mount Hamilton Cemetery when he was 12 years old. Dad, please, what do I tell Vanessa? And here is the thing I'd take back if I could have it back. I still think it was true. I still think it needed saying. I'd take it back anyway. Tell her whatever you want, I said. You've had 3 years of practice. I hung up on my son. I sat on that pail in the dark of a crawl space in Ancaster with my phone in my lap and my hands smelling like flux paste, and I put my head down for a while. 12 minutes later, my phone rang again. Her voice was warm and easy, like old friends catching up over coffee. Murray, I think there's just been a misunderstanding. You know how much we value you. I didn't say anything. I'm 7 months pregnant. I'm under more pressure than I can describe right now. This Holbrook contract is everything. And I don't think you realize what you're doing to your son, to your grandchild. I let the silence stretch. When it didn't fill, she reached for the last thing she had. I just think, she said, soft as a blade going in sideways, that a grandfather who would do something like this to his own family, that isn't the kind of influence I want around a baby. I stood up off the pail. I walked out of that crawl space into the November afternoon and stood in a stranger's backyard, holding a flashlight I no longer needed. You told my son I embarrassed you, I said. Murray, that's not. You folded my jacket face down on the dryer next to a box you were sending to Goodwill. You dressed me in a jacket 2 sizes too small and watched me stand in it open all night. You introduced me to the most important client your firm has ever had as the man who did some work on the house. Silence. I didn't do anything to you, I said. I stopped doing things for you. Those are not the same thing. That's the most important difference there is, and I'd suggest you get clear on it before that boy is old enough to be watching how you handle it. She hung up. 6 days later, the certificate of insurance lapsed, and the Holbrook contract had a clause about active COI on file that my son's wife, apparently, had never once read all the way through. She fought. I want to be fair to her here, and it has cost me something each time I've tried to be. She called 3 insurance companies. Every one of them told her what Gus told me. Underwriting a 3-year renovation firm with no independent claims history, 6 to 8 weeks. She went to 2 banks in Toronto that didn't know us. She sat across from loan officers in good clothes and made the case. Both said no. One said no in under 15 minutes. There was exactly one person in the province of Ontario with enough clean, unencumbered equity to stand behind that business. A house in Hamilton free and clear since 2014. A plumbing company with no liens, 28 years of clean operation, 60,000 in the credit union, and a truck with 212,000 kilometers on it. I'm not a wealthy man. I want that understood, but I don't owe anyone anything. In a bank, that's the whole game. She didn't call me to apologize. She sent an email. I found out from Gus, who found out through his compliance contact at the insurer, who found out from someone in Holbrook's office. My son's wife had written to Holbrook's firm explaining the delay in the certificate of insurance. She copied the 3 principals at her staging company. She wrote that the situation arose from a family difficulty, that her husband's father, an elderly tradesperson, had withdrawn from a financial arrangement without fully understanding the implications, and that they were working with him and his family doctor to address it. Elderly tradesperson, without fully understanding the implications, his family doctor. I don't have a family doctor. I've got a knee that clicks when it's cold, and a dentist in Westdale I see every other year whether I need to or not. I hold a master plumber's license issued by the province of Ontario, 28 years, not one violation, not one claim, not one written complaint filed against me by any contractor, any homeowner, or any municipal inspector in this province. She told a commercial developer's compliance department, in writing, that I was not in my right mind. That email had Holbrook's assistant on the distribution list, and Holbrook had already asked me a question. I know some of you are sitting there right now, wondering at what point I went too far. Maybe I did, but I want to put it to you straight before I finish this. At exactly what point does a father stop being the foundation under a son who let him be erased from his own family? Was it the jacket? Was it the Goodwill box? Or was it the words "deal with it"? Put your answer in the comments. I'll be reading every single one, because the answer matters, and I'm still not sure I have it right. November 19th, 9:15 in the morning. A boardroom on the 14th floor of a glass building on King Street West in Mississauga. I had never been in a building like it. Carpet you couldn't hear yourself walk on. Windows all the way to the floor. Here is who was in that room. 3 principals from my son's wife's staging firm, a contract attorney from Holbrook's group, 2 of Holbrook's senior project managers, my son's wife at the head of the table, and my son at the far end, hands flat, the color of old concrete. And seated next to Holbrook in the middle of the long side where the money always sits, me. I had come straight off a rough-in in Burlington. There was flux paste in the creases of my knuckles, and I did not wipe it off. I wore my jacket, the navy canvas one, Sloane plumbing across the back, Murray over the left breast. My son's wife looked up when I walked in and didn't understand yet. She had about 60 more seconds. Holbrook stood. He pushed his chair back and crossed the room and shook my hand, paste and all, and did not wipe his palm afterward. I watched for it. Murray, thank you for coming. Sit next to me. He turned to the room. Before we proceed, I want to introduce someone. Some of you have met him. He looked down the length of the table when he said the next part, directly at my son's wife. Murray Sloane is a master plumber. He's been in the trades in this province for 28 years. His company worked on 3 of my developments in the early 2000s, including the Dundas Road project. In 2004, he identified a cross-connection in the mechanical room on that build that would have failed the occupancy inspection. He flagged it, repaired it, and did not bill me for the time or the materials. Someone's pen had stopped moving. I have been attempting to hire his company for 15 years. Holbrook let that sit. Last month, he finally agreed. He turned slightly toward my son's wife. Sloane Plumbing is the mechanical contractor on Lakeshore Commons. It is why I became aware of this situation at all. He set his hands flat on the table. An email came through my office suggesting that Mr. Sloane withdrew from a financial agreement without understanding what he was signing. A pause. I have spoken with him twice this week. He reviewed every clause of a 14-page mechanical services contract and caught an arithmetic error in my own payment schedule that my project team had missed. The room was so quiet I could hear the HVAC cycling. So I have one question, and I would like a clear answer from someone at this table. He looked at my son's wife steadily. Which one of you is lying to me? Nobody spoke. And then my son stood up. His hands were shaking. He put them flat on the glass table so the room wouldn't see. He didn't look at his wife, not once, not through any of it. Mr. Holbrook, the email was false. My father is not cognitively impaired in any way. Raid. Her voice was small. He kept going. On the 2nd of November, my father came to our home for dinner. My wife placed his work jacket in the garage, next to a box of items being donated to Goodwill. One of the principals near the window looked at the ceiling. She then left a blazer out for him that was 2 sizes too small, and didn't say a word when he wore it open all night. He took a breath. She introduced him, to you, Mr. Holbrook, as the man who did some work on the house. Margot's world and tires shifted in 1 row back. Nobody moved. And when she told me he embarrassed her, my son said, I told her I would deal with it. His jaw worked. He withdrew the personal guarantee on my company. That was his legal right, and he'd had it since the day he signed in 2019. He also paid $4,200 in outstanding interest out of his own pocket, so my firm wouldn't take a penalty on the note. He looked around the table. He did that in the same week we humiliated him in our own house. The silence in that boardroom was absolute. I'm not asking you to sign with us, Mr. Holbrook. I can see where this is going, and I've made my peace with it. For the first time, he looked at me. I'm asking you to know who my father is. And here is the thing I want you to carry out of this with you. I did not say one word through any of it. I sat in my jacket with paste on my knuckles, and I let other people say my name out loud in a room full of people who already knew who I was. That is what they had been taking from me. Not the credit line, not the insurance premium, the right to be named. My son's wife made one final choice. She was composed. I will say that about her until I'm in the ground. 7 months pregnant, standing in front of 6 professionals and the biggest client her firm had ever had, and her voice did not shake. I think we're all overreacting to a private family matter, she said. This is personal business being introduced into a professional setting. Monsieur Sloane. Holbrook's voice was quiet and even. You did not describe it as a private matter when you put it in an email to 9 people, including my office. A pause. You questioned the professional competence and mental fitness of a licensed tradesperson in writing to a commercial lender. That is not a family disagreement. He picked up a pen, set it down. That is a liability. She opened her mouth. Sloane Renovations will not be receiving the Lakeshore Commons contract. He picked up his water glass and drank. And for the first time that entire morning, I spoke. She turned to look at me. The whole room did. I found when I got there that I wasn't angry at her. There was no victory in it. I was 57 years old and very tired, and I had only one thing left to say. Vanessa, I said. Yes. You were right about one thing. She waited. I did embarrass you. Her eyes went wet. I never understood why. Not for one day of my whole life did I understand how a work jacket and 28 years of honest trades work could embarrass anyone in any room. I stood. I buttoned my jacket. Not until I watched you try to explain me to a man who'd been looking for me for 15 years. Here are the numbers. I'll give them to you straight, because numbers don't lie. And I've never trusted a story that won't show them. My son's wife did not lose her job. 7 months pregnant, 6 years of strong performance at the firm. They were never going to terminate her, and I never wanted them to. But her partner review was suspended for 18 months. An HR file was opened, not for the family dispute, but for transmitting false statements about an individual's professional competence to a commercial lender. She was removed from the Holbrook account, permanently. Her career went backward 3 years in one morning. Her mother, who had circulated the story through their circle, the poor judgment of that fading old tradesman, Vanessa's difficult situation, discovered that 3 women in that circle had Sloane Plumbing's number stored in their phones and had been using it for years. My son lost the Holbrook contract. He laid off 4 people. He drove to each of their houses to do it. He sold the company van. He moved the office from a suite in Oakville to his spare bedroom, in a house that had gone quiet in ways he was still learning to measure. He did not ask me for $1, not once, not then, not since. He's taken on residential work this year. Real houses in Hamilton for families who've never hired a designer and always assumed they weren't allowed to. He's good at it. He's better at it than he was at the other thing. Anyone who knows him can see he's happier. That matters more than I have words for. Sloane Plumbing signed the mechanical services contract on Lakeshore Commons. $2.4 million, 4 years. I hired 3 journeymen out of the Union Hall in Hamilton who had been sitting on the bench since spring. I still drive the Ram, but I did one thing with the first progress draw. I called Gus and told him to find me something newer with a decent rack on it, because I wasn't done pulling pipe. He found me a 2019. Same color. He's good people, Gus. My grandson was born in February. Nobody called me. I found out from a photograph posted online. A blue hospital blanket. A red, furious face, my son's hand enormous against that tiny shoulder. One line of caption. Welcome, Thomas Arthur Sloane. Arthur, my father's name. I sat at my kitchen table, with the phone in my hand for a long time. I didn't call. I'd said what I said, and a man who draws a line and then walks across it himself 3 days later has drawn nothing at all. On the 4th morning, someone knocked. My son's wife stood on my porch alone, coat open, looking like she hadn't slept properly since October. Out in the driveway I could see a car seat in the back window. She didn't apologize first. She said, I don't know how to ask you for something after what I did. I stood in the door and didn't invite her in. She told me something I had not seen coming. My father drove fuel trucks out of Sarnia, she said. Her voice was flat, the way voices go when someone is saying a thing they've spent years not saying. He didn't own the truck. He didn't own anything. My mother told people he was in logistics management. A pause. She still does. The wind moved across the yard. She taught me one thing, my son's wife said. From the time I was 6 years old, she taught it to me over and over. You ever let anyone see where you've came from, they will take everything you've built. She looked past me at nothing. I've been afraid of that my entire adult life, and I made you pay for it. She looked at me then. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't think I've earned that yet. I'm asking if you would hold him. I want to tell you that I forgave her right there on the porch in the February cold. I didn't. I'm not built that way, and neither was my father before me. We're Hamilton men. We don't rush that kind of thing. I'll hold him, I said. Come inside. She brought him in, and she put him in my arms. Thomas Arthur Sloane, 8 pounds, 14 ounces, red and furious and completely uninterested in any of it. He took hold of my index finger, the one with the scar across the knuckle from a copper fitting that slipped in 2006. He held on with everything he had. I stood in my kitchen holding my grandson, and I said what I'd been working out how to say for 3 months. Here's how this goes now. She nodded. I will be in his life, not on a schedule, not when it's convenient, not when the right people are watching, in his life. That is not something you give me. It's something I have. Yes. I'm not signing anything for your business. Not this year, maybe not ever. Whatever you and my son build from here, you build it on your own foundation. That's not punishment. It's the only way it'll ever be yours. Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. Third, I looked down at the boy. I'm going to wear my jacket to his christening. And when someone asks who I am, and someone will, you're going to answer, out loud, in front of whoever's in that room. She was very still. And last, I waited until she met my eyes. If you ever suggest to anyone, a bank, a doctor, a lawyer, a neighbor, anyone, that I am not in my right mind, I will walk out of this family and you will not hear from me again. No warning, no conversation. I'll just be gone. Vanessa Sloane stood in my kitchen and cried without making a single sound, which told me more about where she came from than anything she'd said in that doorway. She nodded. Good, I said. Sit down, I'll put the kettle on. The christening was in April. St. Joseph's in Stony Creek. Same kind of crowd as the dinner in November. Good coats. Easy laughter. The kind of room where nobody's ever once worried about a bill coming due. I wore my jacket. Washed, pressed. Still not supposed to press canvas. Still did it anyway. The lettering on the back worn almost to shadow. Murray over the left breast, thread the color of old paper. I got there 20 minutes early and stood at the back near the doors. Because that's where I've always stood in rooms like that, and I'm done pretending otherwise. My son's wife saw me from the front. She walked the full length of that church. Every head turned to watch her do it. She took my arm and she walked me to the first pew and sat down beside me without a word. 8 minutes later, the woman seated beside me leaned over with a smile that had been practiced in rooms considerably nicer than this one, and said, in the voice people use when they think they already know the answer, "And who's this?" My son started to respond. His wife put her hand on his arm and stopped him, and she stood up. In that church full of people who were paying attention, deciding what she was, she stood up and said it loud enough for the people in the back row to hear every word. This is Murray Sloane. He's a master plumber. He's been in the trades in this province for 28 years. He put my husband through school. He plumbed our house on 3 weekends and refused every dollar we tried to give him. She looked at the woman who'd asked. He is the reason this family is still standing. He is Thomas's grandfather. The church was silent. And then, from 3 rows back, Holbrook began to clap. That summer, Lakeshore Commons, 2nd floor, July. 32 degrees and no HVAC yet because I hadn't energized the rooftop units. I texted my son that morning, 3 words, bring the boy. He came at 3:30. Hard hat too big for him, which is right. He's not the contractor on this job, and he never will be, and he came anyway because I asked him. Thomas was strapped to his chest in one of those carriers, 5 months old, and staring at everything with the seriousness of a man reading a set of drawings. I came down off the ladder. I wiped my hands on my jeans, which never works, and I took off my jacket. I didn't hand it to him. I put it over his shoulders the way you'd lay a blanket on a man who'd been out in the cold too long. Hold that a minute, I said. He stood there with rebar and concrete dust all around him, his son against his chest and his father's jacket across his back. And he looked down at the fabric, like he was trying to read something in it. It's heavier than I expected, he said. Yeah, I said, I know. I let him have a minute. Then I took it back. Give it here, I've got work. I put it on, I buttoned it. I went back up the ladder. The afternoon light came in orange through the rough openings, where the glass panels hadn't gone in yet, and up on the scaffold I could feel the whole building working. The fresh copper running clean, the pressure holding exactly where it was supposed to, the lines running exactly where they were meant to run. Over my heart, the stitching's worn almost through now. But in good light, if you know where to look, you can still read it. Murray. I never needed anyone in this world to read it. I just needed to be allowed to wear it.